Welcome to the Forest Overstory podcast. This podcast explores forest stewardship in the Pacific Northwest, helping landowners and professionals gain new insights and information in the field of forest management. The Forest Overstory is a product of the Washington State University Extension Forestry Program and is supported by the Washington Department of Natural Resources and the Society of American Foresters. All right, well, welcome back, Forest Overstory listeners. Happy June. We are back for another great episode. Here with me today is Jenny Glass, a diagnostician and manager of the WSU Puyallup Plant and Insect Diagnostic Lab, also just called Plant Clinic sometimes. Jenny, how are you doing?
Doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I am excited to have this conversation today with you because I'm ashamed to admit that even though I am a WSU employee, I know so little about the plant clinic and all the services that it provides. And
Well,
so
we
this
are a good kept secret, so even though we try not to be. So, yeah,
probably because I imagine if you get too well known, then you're drinking from a fire hose, right?
right.
Yeah, and like anyone at WSU, we all have capacity issues, but you do so much great work. So yeah, I'm really excited to dig into it. And I mean, just to give our listeners a little bit of background, can you just tell us maybe about the primary function of the plant clinic?
Okay. So, the lab that I run, and I've run it for 23 years, is designed to help homeowners, master gardeners, landscape professionals, crop growers, Christmas tree producers, foresters, everybody basically solve problems with plant diseases and insect pests as well as stresses. So the lab receives information about a plant problem, and sometimes the first thing we do is say, hey, you've noticed something, but it's not a problem. That's a feature of the plant or the time of year when that plant does things. Um, and then if we do think it's a problem, we try to figure out if something is a living cause or a non-living cause, so a stress or a disease or a
Right.
pest, and then we try to figure out which one is that. And then my goal as a diagnostician is to tell you what you could do about it. So many times there is live and let live. I mean, that's a lot of the forest issues out there are things that are normal parts of a forest, and there are maybe some things you could do like plant a different type of tree, but there might not be anything practical you can do for that particular, plant while it's having that problem. Other things, there's lots of stuff you can do. You could prune for good air circulation. You could use a pesticide or something like that. You could plant the plant at a different time of year. There's all sorts of things you could do. So it kind of varies. And then, my main goal is, can you solve the problem so you can sleep at night. So sometimes that means stopping at, maybe it's a pathogen and there's, sit back, it's not going to hurt the plant other than aesthetics, or maybe it's no, you got to do something. And then there will be times where, I'll tell you the name of the organism, the family of the pest or something like that. And then there's lots of times where I'm like, I worked really hard, I don't see this or that, but I'm pretty positive it was a stress. And so, at this point, monitor it, and if things change, let's rediscuss. So I'd love to say it was we put a puzzle together every time, and you have a beautiful picture of what's going on when you're done. But what we do is we take the puzzle pieces and we work them around and try to figure out what makes the most sense. Um, and then, I'm from Washington State. I grew up in the Kitsap Peninsula in a wooded area.
Mm,
Grew up, hiking the mountains of the Olympics, the beaches of the Olympic Peninsula when in the summer. I mean, in the winter when the mountains were all covered with snow. So
right.
I've seen a lot over my years. I've gardened since I was probably 12 years old. So grown a lot of stuff, and then I've had a lot of other, crop research and gardening, growing types of experiences. So
Nice.
basically, I always consider myself the jack of all trades, master of not much, but a great resource for a good place to start. And so I definitely encourage the people listening today that if they have some sort of problem that they're experiencing in their forest, that they at least start by maybe emailing me. Jenny Glass at wsu.edu is the best way to get a hold of me. I'm online. You can find that email real easy. Um, and email me a little situation and a picture of what's going on, and we can start seeing if there's something that we could do to help you out.
That's great. Yeah, no, I that's exactly the overview I was hoping for. I think it's funny that you consider yourself a jack of all trades, master of none, because I feel that way about myself oftentimes. Inch deep, a mile wide, kind of.
Right.
But
And
I
I'm
was going to say the opposite of you is you're kind of the nitty gritty, in my opinion, because a lot of times in forestry we're working on best guesses about certain pathogens, insects, and diseases. And it sounds like you get to be kind of like the last stop to some degree and say, it is this pathogen for
yeah.
sure, down
And
to
we,
the genus and species, and that's
yeah.
exactly what we need sometimes.
Yeah, and we do have, tools that allow us to do that kind of stuff. We run a lot of our disease problems onto laboratory auger, trying to grow out the fungus or the
Mm-hmm.
bacteria. We look at certain types of testing. We can detect phytophthora root rot diseases in roots with a little kind of uh, similar to your COVID test, where positive, negative is the pathogen there or not.
Yeah.
And we can do that with a lot of different types of plant tissue. There are all sorts of other analyses. My lab is pretty low tech though. So like if I need to, if I find a fungus and I can't recognize it based on the look of the fungus, I may, depending on who you are, say, okay, well that's enough. We found a fungus. It's most likely a pathogen. We have all the arsenal we can do to start managing it. Or if you're the nursery producer that's producing plants for other people, well, it's be really important to know what that actually is. And
Right.
so I might be able to ask a colleague who's a mycologist or send it down to a lab that does DNA analysis or something. So I often consider myself kind of the middleman broker for these kind of things. And with all the skills out there, there really isn't anything that can't be pinpointed a lot, but a lot of times it's quite the practical is we can stop before we get to that pinpointing part, just because it isn't going to make a ton of difference to the forest owner or the crop producer or something what exactly it is. It's
Yeah.
is it a fungus or is it a stress, because that'll tell us what we're going to do. And then also, like most of the people listening today, I mean, we only have a certain budget to get
Right.
these things done. And you can buy a lot of trees for $150, which would be what would cost to get like some DNA analyzed at another lab. So there's this. I always joke because I feel like over the 20 some years I've been here, I have saved a lot of the molecular people a lot of heartache, because I'm the practical person. I'm like, is the pathogen you're looking for in the database? Is it important to know this kind of thing? Thank you for that piece of genetic information, but in fact, you're look, whatever the database you're reading it off of is wrong, because I gave you a fungus and that's a plant. So it's an interesting time to be in diagnostics, because there's so many tools out there. We watch TV and we expect all these high class diagnostics, and yet when the end of the day, many times you just need somebody who's been around and looked at things, to get you in the right direction for this types of solutions. And as your listeners will know, I feel like back 20 some years ago, I was a lot worse diagnostician, but it was a lot easier for me because I didn't know all the various things that were out there. And almost everybody who comes into my lab and talks about owning a piece of forest or owning a Christmas tree farm or something like that. I mean, they always talk about how 5 years ago they wouldn't have even noticed the problem that they're coming in for today, because they were just so busy trying to stay on top of everything else. And then as it gets those things get easier, then they start to notice the branches that are wilting, or the leaf
Right.
spots or something like that. So I think that, especially for the listeners of this podcast, I mean, there's just so much out there, that one of the first things I often tell people is, let's figure out if how concerned we need to be, because many of the things that we're going to see are just part of the forest.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great point, and it's funny because even last week I was teaching a forest health class for a master gardener training, and I always joke because it's a long talk. It ends up being like 2 to 3 hours, and I cover maybe 2% of the insects and diseases out there that could that want to munch on your trees in some way or another. But it's just because those are the ones that really only ever require management, and most of the
Right.
other ones, they're just part of the healthy ecosystem.
Hmm.
um, so you mentioned that you grew up in Kitsap County, you're a gardener, so like many people in extension, this isn't just a job for you; it's also part of your passion, part of your life, I imagine. So, going on that road, I'm kind of curious. What brought you to this position? What were you doing before this, if anything, or was this your first gig? Let's learn a little more about that.
No. I got into gardening because my mother kicked me off the playground saying, "You're too big for the swing set. But I still wanted to be out and about in nature and away from my siblings. So gardening was the thing that I liked. And then at North Kitsap, we had a wonderful horticulture program. And my mom said, anybody who loved plants as much as I did was going to take that class. And it was a awesome program. The teacher was fantastic. We were on FFA and we did judging and stuff like that. And so my first job was on Bainbridge Island on the Bloedel Reserve. I was a high school student that was mowing lawns for Bloedel and things like that. And it was awesome, but I was around a ton of gardeners and I think that were really falling apart, because the work was so hard. And I am like, do I want all these medical problems at age 30? No, not really. So I headed off to Oregon State, got a degree in plant pathology research of all crazy things, because I went into the horticulture program, but it was kind of slow to get started.
Hmm.
And my advisor said, "Oh, well, my buddy in a plant pathology lab needs some help in the lab." And within a week of washing dishes and plating things, I mean, the idea that these tiny, almost invisible, cells could take out the entire pear orchards of Oregon just fascinated me, and I just never looked back. So, my background is in plant pathology, and I worked on strawberry. What was it? Strawberry botrytis, gray mold of strawberry was my first project that I ever worked on.
Oh, cool.
Um, Knew I was heading into the sciences somehow, but wasn't sure what to do. And so I joined the Peace Corps for 2 years and was in West Africa in the Gambia, working with women gardeners, growing plants.
Wow.
Um, and so the irony is, we did a lot of diagnosis in that work. I mean, sometimes it was quite obvious. Oh, the forest burned down. Yeah, okay, that was a big deal. Or the cows got into the plots and ate up all the trees. But a
Hmm.
lot of times, like one time, I bought a bunch of tomato seeds and was selling them to the gardeners there, and they all started dying. And then I had to figure out what was going on. And unfortunately, the tomatoes that we had bought were highly sensitive to nematodes, and there were a lot of these pathogenic nematodes in the soil. So it was like, okay, get the word out. Don't buy this type of tomato because it's not going to grow for your farmers, kind of thing. And then one day in a really hot telephone booth, I'm trying to figure out what's next in my life, and I called my former boss up and said, "Okay, I left you the application for grad school. I'm applying today." And so worked on potato late blight, which is that disease that caused the Irish potato famine. And then after 3 years
Wow.
of that, I wanted to come home to Washington. And I was looking for a job, and a colleague knew the diagnostician here at Puyallup, and so I came up and I worked for Gary Chastagner, Mr. Christmas Tree or Dr. Christmas Tree that most of you know.
Hmm.
And so for a summer, I worked for the plant clinic, and then the diagnostician had to take a new job, and then that I got in the position and just loved it. Probably did 90% of my actual, like, what does a powdery mildew look like? How do you culture a bacteria? Because I knew two systems really well and I knew only vague amounts of the rest of it. So the first several years, the learning curve was so steep, but I had nothing else to do. So it was pretty fun to, hang out in the lab and learn, 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 learn. And so I learned how to, about the diseases, about the insect. I mean, I had a little tiny entomology background, um,
Hmm.
but it wasn't something that I was tuned to looking for. So, I'd always be like working hard, and then the entomologist would be like, "Oh, wait, did you see the aphids on that? Did you see, did you see the psyllids or whatever it was?" So I had to learn about looking for insects, and so now I'm actually very very good for a plant pathologist. I mean, I would never call myself an entomologist, but I'm certainly a better entomologist than most plant entomologists are plant pathologists. So, um, you know,
That's funny.
and I think the thing I love about this is that one, it's a combination of science, but it's also a combination of helping people. So, you know,
Yeah.
working for a university, never having enough funds, never having the staff you want. I'm always frustrated because I do my best, but I never seem to be able to get back as fast as I would like to people and those kind of things. And yet when I do get back to them and I've told them something and they're going to be able to, manage a problem, sleep better at night, maybe recover some costs of something they've been losing. Oh, it is a wonderful feeling. And then the other thing that being working for the university allows is a lot of educational opportunities. So I teach, not as much as I could, because I mean I could do it every day with people who have requests, but I mean I stick to a lot of the really important organizations, and I've worked for like taught for the community forest program and a few other things in the past. So it's just fun to be able to share experiences, and then I also learn when I go see audiences of like your listeners here today, because they can tell you so much and they can keep you
Right.
on touch of what's going on and stuff like that that you just can't find when you're staring at a in a microscope in the lab.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. I like your journey to extension. It sounds like you found that you really belonged in this position and then just kind of shaped it to your liking too,
You
which is
got it.
great. Yeah. Well, so I mean, it's really I, I want. I'm so tempted to dig into the potato thing, but I have to remember this is a forestry podcast, so maybe another time because I think that's really fascinating. But I'm just kind of curious. You got into this position. What and not really having like the forestry side of things. What was your uh you know process or experience? What was like the first forest health pass that you sort of became intimately aware of?
Well, I mean, we in many of my plant pathology classes, we'd have diagnosis classes, and so like, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I remember the first time I was on a field trip at Oregon State, field trip class where we'd go around and see different things. And I mean, first of all, it was cool, like the day we were in forestry, because we were running around the woods with foresters, and
Sure.
they were teaching us a lot of stuff. And like, at one point, us grad students were like cutting at the bark of a dead tree, and the forester's like, do you see how tall this tree is, and do you see how rotten that bark is? And if it came down on you, you would probably be dead. you know so he taught us a lot, and he taught us to look for widow makers, and just being
Mm-hmm.
smart in the woods. Um, and then at the end of that day, or the teacher said, "Okay, your plant to figure out for the week. The problem for the week is on that tree." And he pointed to a tree, and I looked at it, and I saw nothing.
Hmm.
And one of my colleagues fortunately knew what he was pointing at, and she said, "Those aren't cones on that spruce." So I went up and it was Cooley
Uh,
spruce gallaudelgid. I mean, it took me
nice.
a couple days to figure it out, but I mean, my first gut was that looks like a perfectly fine spruce tree with a lot of cones on it, and yet what I was calling cones were, growths on the spruce that when you cut them in, you could see that, the insects had created them and stuff like that. So that was probably the first one.
That
You
is a
know,
tricky one. That's
yeah,
good
yeah.
on him on that. That's
But
funny.
then back when back when I was a kid, my favorite we had a big maple tree in the yard that was a weeping form, wasn't a forest type, but it was great when you had a lot of siblings, because you could just go under that tree and hide out for a long period of time. And one day one branch started dying and another branch started dying, and I was pretty upset. And so my dad, was always good at helping figure things out. Um, and so we went to the books and looked it up and discovered that it was dying of verticillium wilt. And so, unfortunately,
Oh.
to this day, there's not much you can do about verticillium wilt. But I mean, just a very early um, interest in plant diseases.
Okay. Well, that is the absolute perfect segue because one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about was sooty bark disease. I know that the plant clinic has been involved to some degree in diagnosing this, and it's I want to give you a chance to give the background because it's probably better than what I could do. But my understanding is, this is not necessarily a new disease. It's been around in Washington for a while, but it's starting to become more aggressive. Is that about right?
Well, I'll give you my perspective.
Sure.
It's lucky that I was not in charge of this, because I probably would have done almost nothing. I mean, when if somebody had sent me the original, disease sample, I would have said, "Okay, there's a bunch of fungi on this dying tree, and it's stressed, and these fungi are, there because it's stressed, and we need to work on the stresses." That kind of, if it, when practical, which unfortunately, the park system was the one that Seattle Parks was the one that turned in the first samples that were really, identified. Um, and there's not much they could do about watering the plants where they were finding them.
Sure.
Um, but fortunately, they didn't ask me. They asked another lab, and they have a molecular thing, and so they picked up a pathogen that is known to be, both an epiphyte, so that is something that lives on plant tissue, but is also an opportunistic pathogen. And so that was the bark pathogen, maple sooty bark. So then they started surveying for it and discovering that it was, pretty widespread. It is native to the United States, and it unfortunately has spread over to Europe. So what I'm helping with, and I'm just sort of like the middleman shuffling the samples to the lab, is a survey to see, what's out there. Dr. Joey Holbert had got some money. I think it was USDA funding to test for it. And that, unfortunately, that money is now gone. So we're trying to figure out what we can do next to pay for these kind of work. Because as all of you listeners know, money, there's never enough money to do everything you want to do.
Right.
Um, but in my take, this is I'm not a forester, right? I'm a generalist, but I see a lot of stuff. My take is that this problem is like as well as maybe the dying maple problem, possibly even associated with some of the dying ferns and dying salal in various parts of, Western Washington, has a lot to do with climate change. It's been hotter, drier, longer, different times, and I'm not going to argue whether or not, what the facts or whatever. But what I'm going to say is that things are definitely different
Right.
now than they were years ago, and unfortunately, plants can't move. Plants can't, um, you know, get the things they need. Like right now, I'm in a lab that's not too hot right now, so I've got a sweater on. By the end of the afternoon, when it's 80 degrees in here, I'm going to have my sweater off. Well, plants just have to kind of deal with what they have. And unfortunately, the reason that what you're going to be seeing is you're going to be seeing a lot of problems as a result.
Yeah.
So like with the maple sooty bark issue, many of the first indicator trees, the ones that the Seattle parks caught their attention of, were trees that love, abundant irrigation, especially in the summer, which we don't get even if nothing was changing. We just don't get that very often in
Right.
Western Washington. So they were the ones that were stressed the most, and so this organism, fungus, was able to really, attack and cause a lot of problems. Um, and so, I truly believe that we will be seeing a lot of this. I'm also a firm believer, like, people change their impressions of things. So, like, if you had talked to my grandfather, another issue that we're having right now is with madrones. They have cankers on the stems, a really
Mm-hmm.
bad number of fungi that are opportunistic leaf spots, or even sometimes primary pathogen leaf spots, especially when, the weather is conducive for the diseases, and that's often cold spells in the winter. And yet, if you talk to my grandfather, I mean, his definition of madrone was awful trash tree that loses leaves year round. Now we call madrones cherished, native ornamental that we need to do a lot about. But the truth is, I mean, in our 3 to 4 generations from now, if you want to see a madrone, you're probably not going to be looking, close. You're going to have to be going up further north where
Mm-hmm.
the environment will be more conducive for that particular species. If the tree can, spread itself that fast too. And
Yeah.
yet, like today, I mean, drove around the southern Puget Sound the last 2 days, and I am amazed at all the beautiful native flowering dogwoods that are, having their bracts showing right now. I mean, it's just such a beautiful tree. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, the dogwood anthracnose organism was just, killing tons and tons of our native dogwoods. And so what happened was that pathogen is still around. It's still influencing our forests. However, in a certain population of the dogwoods, there's a couple that are resistant or less, susceptible. And those are the ones you're seeing today. You're not seeing anything that it's not that the pathogen went away. It's that over the course of 40, 50, 60 years or whatever, I guess it's like 50 now, the 70s to now, the the really, really susceptible trees died. The ones that were, somewhat damaged, somewhat thrived, but the ones that weren't really impacted have started to thrive. And so you're going to be seeing a ton more of the more hardy or more resistant types of dogwoods. And it's the same dogwood. It's just a slight genetic change somehow that allows it not to not to be killed off by that pathogen. So my guess is that the same, similar things are going to be happening with all these issues that we have in our trees right now.
Mm,
You know, there will be, you know, some big leaf maples that are just better suited for all the stresses, and they're going to be the ones that are going to start to thrive. They'll reproduce. There will be
yeah.
some, we're going to in our urban forest, we're going to be planting more maples that can handle, stressful situations instead of the like the red maples that really like the moisture and stuff like that. So it's interesting, especially this, the sooty bark disease, where I mean it probably is native to parts of the United States. I mean, may even be native here. We don't really know that for sure. Um, but you often think of only invasive problems as issues, but no. I mean, there's times when things will be the one of the things I always talk about with plant disease is that you have to have the plant, the pathogen, and the environment must be conducive for the establishment of disease. So, at this point, I really believe that we need to keep an eye on the environment too, because that's influencing a lot of what we're seeing in our forests and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm right there with you. I don't think it's a coincidence that these diseases are becoming more relevant and problematic around the same time. After 10 years of pretty frequent, hot, dry summers,
Right.
extremely dry and abnormally hot. I don't think that's a coincidence at
Right.
all.
And several years ago, I was in Rocky Mountain National Park, and we were seeing all the prescribed burns, and they were having all this gorgeous signage about how it was to kill off the bark beetles. And my, brain is like, bull. I mean, you could just see hundreds of acres with, away that the bark beetles were attacking. And about 6 months later, I was like, oh, wait a minute, where were they burning? They were burning around the roads, the campgrounds, the historical
Mm,
structures. They were burning to protect people, and then they were giving this message that it was for the forest, which it wasn't going to hurt, but the people that were making those plans obviously understood that bark beetles were cyclic, taking advantage of the situation, but that they needed to make sure that people weren't in danger of forest fires and things like that. So it was kind of
yeah.
interesting.
No, it is, and I think you're right. I think you mentioned uh, this is a process that has happened throughout Earth's history. The difference is that it's happening a lot faster now, and that is the variable, right? How quickly can trees adjust? But certainly some are more genetically resilient to
Right.
things like city bark disease. I think site also plays a really important role. The way I explain it to folks is, every tree has its ideal conditions and can also live outside of those ideal conditions, but we're seeing that sort of spectrum just tighten up in a lot of
Exactly.
species. Big leaf
And
maple is an example. The decline, those areas like forest edges are a big one. Urban areas. I also always try to remind people, because this conversation can get very doomsday very quickly, and it's serious, and we need to be taking it seriously. But I also try to remind people that a lot of the damage we're seeing is in areas that we see a lot, by
mhm,
roads and stuff. So maybe the damage is just or it looks disproportionate, and I manage a property for WSU here in Olympia, and I'm seeing big leaf maple decline on the edges. In the interior, not so much.
right.
So definitely a very serious problem. But I always like to give people a little ray of hope there when we talk about things that are killing their trees.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think that site function is really important, like you said with madrone. Whether it's through their own migration or by us, assisting in that migration, species are going to have to we're going to have to be very much more intimately aware of the sites that these species want to be
Right.
on. Yeah,
And like my colleagues here at WSU Puyallup, I mean, they have a madrone plots where they've gathered seed from the entire West Coast, and they're looking to see what's really susceptible to the different diseases and what's not. And it's amazing. You can see a completely dead plant, and then there'll be a plant, right next to it from a different seed
yeah,
source that's thriving. So
yeah.
nature is very resilient. We do have to do our part, and we should not, and I guess the other thing I always tell people is just because it seems discouraging doesn't mean we can't do anything. So today is a
Right.
great day to start.
Yes, I like that. That's a good message. I want to maybe this is just for my edification, but hopefully it's valuable to the listeners as well. Because I don't know a lot about the Madrone diseases, but I know that WSU has some dedicated efforts around that, as you mentioned. From what I've heard about it and the little research I've done, it it seems like there's a whole suite of actual, diseases and insects potentially that really go after Madrone. But is it a killer of the tree? Are there any in particular that are more worrisome, and will it actually kill the madrone? Because a lot of what I've heard is that it tends to knock them back and make them look very bad, but they usually don't kill them.
Yeah, and my advice for madrone problems is, enjoy the new growth as it's coming out in spring. When it finally blackens up, stare at a orange colored part of the bark and, rotate through the year. Um, yeah, yeah, unfortunately, there are trees that are dying. There's areas, but again, I think this
Yeah,
it's more than just the disease, it's the environment and everything. What we first the we I'm going to use the row because I really didn't have anything to do with this part, but the first thing about madrones was they discovered how poorly adapted to any changes they are. I mean, they like the situation that they're growing in. And so a lot of the initial concerns with the fungal cankers that were killing off branches and things like that was that people would get in there and they would prune, and then there would be a sunburn event. And then the sunburn event was wounded tissue that a pathogen would get into. So a lot of and if you look at a madrone stem, you'll see like there's ridges of callus tissue all around those cankers. Madrones are really good at walling off the damage and trying to keep going. So that's why we kind of tell people, live and let live with a madrone, but try to not do much with it. Just leave it alone. Well, when the variety of fungal infections, I mean, we've always had leaf spots on madrone leaves, but maybe 10, 15 years ago, I can't remember the exact date, we started noticing what we'd call, a madrone blight. All the leaves were blackening on almost all the trees. And so, and Dr. Marianne Elliott has looked a lot at various fungi. She's found a couple, major types that seem to be doing that. They seem to be tied with cold temperatures. And I am a firm believer that that is not helpful for the plant, but not necessarily lethal. I mean, it's just the trees that die are the ones that aren't in the best site. They're the ones that have, the
sure.
disease, the canker, and then yeah, insects. There's a lot of different, leaf miners and all sorts of other stuff, and it's just a jungle. So when I'm going to give a hands-on workshop, I mean, I have to say madrone's one of the first plants I go to look for because there's always something you can find to show somebody. But yeah, most of the stuff is going to be aesthetically, unpleasing to look at, but the madrone has a massive amount of ways that it's managing those problems.
That's fine. I have a spindly little Charlie Brown Christmas tree style madrone in my yard that is every year I think, well, I can't live another year. There's no way. I mean, it just looks so sad. But every year it puts
Mhm.
out a little new growth, and you're exactly right. It's
Yeah,
it's stubborn,
right. And then
maybe in a good way.
right, and then one of the things they learned was, I mean, people would say madrone doesn't transplant well. Well, that's not true. Madrone
Mhm.
doesn't transplant from the wild well. Like if you dig up a wild plant, it's probably not going to survive.
Sure.
But if you plant it from in a pot and transplant that pot, it works just great. So,
Okay. Interesting. So I want to continue this conversation on, you know, insects and diseases and all the things that are trying to kill your trees. Um, and one of the ones I wanted to talk about today was emerald ash borer. We actually had a really great episode for the listeners that might have missed it. I think 2 episodes ago. I should really know that better. We had Karen Ripley on with the
oh,
Forest Service
Karen's
to kind of.
great.
Oh, Karen's amazing, and we had a really great conversation about emerald ash borer and its history, its origin, and what the impacts in Washington might be, and how the next 10 years might play out now that we are home to this invasive insect. So we don't need to necessarily get into too many of the details on you know what kind of devastation it can cause. We know, I mean, up to you know often up to 99%, nearly 100% mortality in some cases. What I'm kind of curious about is, what do you think the plant clinic's role will be as we start to get more and more potential sightings, and people it becomes more publicly aware that this is an issue?
Right. So one of the first things the plant can help with is we do a lot of diagnosis.
Yeah.
And so I just actually attended a wood boring beetle workshop led by Oregon Department of Agriculture, and the EAB is in the bupressid beetle. And I, in a course of a week, I looked at about 90 different types of bupressid beetles that we have around here, and and was shown identification keys, screening aids, etc. So if a landowner or listener of this podcast takes a look at something and notices that, some sort of green beetle like organism, and they're not sure, you know, get us a sample, even a good picture. And many of our cell phones now have a magnifying app, and you just take that particular thing. And I wouldn't be able to tell you it was EAB exactly from an image, but I could definitely rule out all the other stuff that are green and, sort of the same idea. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then I also work, our director here at Puyallup is an entomologist, and he's taken the same training, and his background and love is entomology. So we plan to work as a team and do that. We've written, with Kevin Zobrist's help. Not we. Kevin Zobrist, with a little bit of my help, let's be honest about this, has written a very extensive bulletin about management and that kind of stuff. But the other thing is, I mean, we're just a great source to send people to. We're educating the master gardeners. We're educating, the landscape professionals and stuff. So I think we'll be doing a lot of clearinghouse of information. And someday we may end up having an urban forester again. And that would, I
Mm.
mean, not an urban forester, a forest entomologist again. Sorry about that. But and that would be a wonderful project to start talking about, because it's going to impact both, people with the native ashes on their property, as well as all the ashes that are used in the nursery industry and stuff like that. So
Right, right. Um, and just to be clear, I know people can also report sightings to the Washington Invasive Species Council. Do you work in tandem with them? Is it like are you actually doing the testing for them? Are you the man behind the curtain, so to
Um,
speak?
at this point, I mean, we talk a lot with Justin Bush, who's in charge of that program and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I'm not sure who the official person is going to be for that particular
Mm,
project, but like one of the if we have another disease called rose rosette disease. It's a disease across the United States, and
hmm.
when the Invasive Species Council gets a report of that, it goes to me because I'm been decided the person who knows the most about this. And of course, 3/4 of the time, fortunately, it's oops, we used some Roundup near that rose, and so we've got herbicide damage.
Right.
Um, and then only one time in the last couple of years have I ever thought, oh, maybe that's it. The one issue is I am a diagnostician. I have no, clout. So all I did was tell the client, I'm a little concerned about your problem because it does meet all the, check marks. Can you send me a sample? And in that case, sadly, all they did was report it online. So we were never able to confirm it. But if we had had it and we'd confirmed it, I would have talked to, Washington Department of Ag and the Invasive Species Council and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, we have a network, and we have a lot of, I guess we could call it maybe the mycelium, the interconnected linking, of all of us. Um, Mycelium is a vegetative term for fungal growth bodies. Um, but yeah, so definitely, when it goes to the Invasive Species Council, if somebody reports it, somebody will be looking at that and saying, "Oh no, that's our golden bupressid." Who every for whatever reason the common name is golden, even though 3/4 of the beetle is this glossy green. Um,
Mm.
you know, or no, we need to look into this. And so yeah, somebody like me or my boss Todd would be the people that would probably be getting that.
Okay, great. Yeah, and there are a lot of lookalikes for Emerald Ash Borer.
Oh yeah,
Oregon Department of Ag has a really nice worksheet that shows all of
all the
them.
different ones.
So it really complicates the whole process. I'm sure that's why we really need your services.
Well, and this like the stuff you and Patrick, I mean, you're sorry, you're Patrick, Kevin, you and Kevin do. I mean, one of the things I've noticed is that in the 23 years that I've worked here, it used to be that we would have maybe 15, 20 insects for identification coming in every year. Um, and we don't hardly get any insects anymore. And one of the reasons is that people can go to the internet and
Mhm.
find great resources. Now, sometimes I'm not sure the quality of those resources, but if you turn to an extension service or something or a university, usually it's pretty good stuff. So that's, I mean, I think that the work we're doing in extension has just been fantastic for these kind of issues,
Sure.
getting the word out.
And just out of curiosity, do you how closely do you work with like local master gardener or master naturalist programs? Is it a thing where, if a landowner thinks they have EAB or thinks they have sooty bark or what have you, might go to a master gardener plant clinic first and then work its way up to you if they can't get it figured out, can't get a positive ID?
Yeah. So the work of the lab is probably 50% of the samples are public or master gardener types of samples that come in here.
Okay. All right.
And so we get a ton of emails, with pictures. That's our pretty much the standard for the last 3 or 4 years. And then if there's something that I'm concerned about, I will definitely be like, hey, this might be what it is, but we need to see it. So, send it in. But yeah, that's the issue with the. I mean, I try to do everything that I can do to help people. I'm one person, there's how many counties that have master gardening programs, et cetera. So I can't, the numbers game doesn't work out that well.
Sure.
But definitely, if a county sent me a sample, we definitely would give them help. If a landowner, calls up, I mean, I get a lot of landowners calling up saying, "I need somebody to come out and walk my property." I'm like, well, certified arborist is going to help you there. I mean, I
Right.
cannot come out to the site, but many of the certified arborists will then send a sample into me to like confirm that it's laminated root rot or the beetle is this type of beetle or something like that. So I always feel like, I mean, I wish we had the time to go out and do site visits and that kind of stuff, but we do have we support so many people that mostly um, we aren't. If one of the listeners here today has a problem, I mean, definitely start by talking to me, and we'll see what we can do for you. But
Yeah.
there might be a case where we have to get others involved as well. Um,
Yeah.
and then that does bring up, a point. What do I do? Well, first of all, we do have to charge some fees for our diagnostic work because it's takes time. There's resources involved like
Sure.
microscopes that need to be maintained, an auger that needs to be purchased. We're relatively cheap, 25 to $40 depending on what's actually happening. I'm the person that does the diagnosis and does the billing, and that's really hard. I mean, your doctor's offices would all go out of business if the doctors were doing the billing too. Um, but try to be as fair as I can, and assess the cost as possible. And then when a sample comes in, I can't I mean, people are like, how fast is it going to be? Well, sometimes it's minutes. Like I know it because I worked on it 15 years ago and I figured it out. Sometimes I work for a month and a half and still don't have an answer for you. So there's
Wow.
no, the good old it depends answer is, I guess, how long it's going to take. But I'm also like the greasy wheel gets the grease. If you squeak, you'll get some grease. So give me a couple days to a week to figure it out, and then start emailing or calling, and I'll do my best. And then the other thing is when we do try to do a diagnosis, we don't just say it's this bug or this disease. We try to tell you what you can do about it. And I generally use things like the PNW Insect Management Handbook or the PNW Plant Disease Handbook, because everybody has different strategies for managing things. So I don't want to tell you, this is the only way to do it. There might be cultural things you can do, like thinning the forest. There might be
Right.
picking the type of plant, replanting certain types of plants. There might be chemicals that may or may not be applicable to the situation, or there are lots of people that come to me and they don't want to use anything, and I'm fine. Okay, so we're going to rely on other management methods instead. So I just tend to say, here are your options that are possibly effective and legal. You pick which ones are going to be. And then there's lots of times where I'm like, I really wish there was something practical to do, but now you have a name to swear at it the next time you notice it. So sadly,
That's
that's
funny.
often the case. And one of the reasons is that we often look at, human health as an individual thing. We're all very valuable individuals. And yet, as you know, as a forester, we look at forests as the ecosystem. We don't look at a
Right.
particular plant. So it's one of the ways where analogies to human medicine don't work so great because we're going to look for, in 100 years for this whole forest, not necessarily for plant, Douglas fir A or vine maple B kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have met some landowners that have named nearly all of their trees.
Right. That's awesome.
And
But
that's wonderful. It's wonderful, but we have to treat it as an aggregate
yeah.
when we're talking about forest ecology. Well, Jenny, this has been awesome, and I'm sure we could continue to talk about all your interesting work and all the all the diseases and insects and stuff that are out there for several more episodes worth of podcasting. But I'm really glad that we booked you and we were able to talk about this, and people can learn about the services of the plant clinic. I think there's a lot of opportunities for the extension forestry program and the plant clinic to work together, especially as we mentioned with all these new tree diseases either becoming more relevant or having new ones entirely, like emerald ash borer. So I just want to thank you
Exactly.
for coming on. If there's any last messages to the listeners, feel free. We can definitely get your email up on
Okay,
the
perfect.
description.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, to the listeners, I just appreciate all the things you're doing to manage your forests. The stewardship of the land is so important. If I can be of any help to you in the terms of diseases or pest identification and management, email is probably my best things. But those of you that want to call, you know, the telephone does occasionally get answered, so don't hesitate that way too. And just thank you for your time today. It was great talking with
Oh,
everybody. So,
perfect. Well, thank you so much. And all right, with that, Overstory listeners, we will catch you next month.